All right, welcome. This is day three for our labor force and unemployment unit plan. This is a walkthrough video for this day. All right, and so the goal of this day is to basically cover two big trends. So we've talked about in the first 2 days how to calculate the labor force participation rate and the unemployment rate. And then we're going to sort of look at an application of both these trends and sort of try to give some history, try to maybe answer some questions that students might care about. Just to start off with, you could just do a check-in, do some retrieval practice to see if the students actually remember what these terms mean that they hopefully learned about the past 2 days. All right, so we'll get into our first trend, which is women's labor force participation. So we have a storyline, if you're not familiar with these storyline activities that we have in our MRU unit plans. It's just a little bit of a guessing game for the students to get involved, where they guess what they think it looks like. I'm just going to sort of, this is not my real guess. Don't make fun of me if I don't do well on this. Shows the women's labor force participation rate over the 20th century. And so we have this fairly significant increase in women's labor force participation. All right, we all sort of know this. Okay, there's many, many more, especially married women, working outside the home than there were before. And so that's our first trend that we're going to explore. So there's what it looks like. Just want a little nicer graph, and we can see this very significant increase, okay, over the back half of the 20th century. Now, what's interesting is if you talk to people who've learned about this, or maybe, if I talk to my college students or something like that, they'll say it was World War II. We all have these images, Rosie the Riveter going to work in the factories during World War II, and they say, okay, it was World War II that really transformed women's labor force participation. This is a big misconception. So that had some effect, but if you look at all of sort of the inflection points, they're much, much later. And so a lot of very good economic historians, one of them, Claudia Golden, who we're going to spend some time with, who won a Nobel Prize recently for some of this work, and says, no, it's really not World War II that is the impetus or the cause. I mean, there's like a few papers that sort of look at it. It has some effect, doesn't have no effect, but there is some effect. But most of the effect is for other reasons, and it happens later on. And so they sort of call this transformation in the working life of women as a quiet revolution, because it's not like a big bang, it doesn't change like all at once. It's really an evolution over time in these areas where, all right, now there's this expectation for employment, there's a investment in education, and there's a delay in family formation. And if you look at sort of the inflection point, the turning point, all of these happen in the mid 70s, not the 1940s. So, I think when historians look at something, they're oftentimes looking for big events, right? And it's much easier to teach, here's this big event, here's that big event. And so, World War II, let's grab that. That's our big event, okay? Really, this is like Claudia Golden says, this is really a quiet revolution, a gradual changing of, expectations and the lived reality, okay? And so we have this video that's going to cover this, and really it's going to be talking a lot about the birth control pill. And so how does the birth control pill relate to economics? That's your first pause and just sort of get students talking. There's no right or wrong answers here. Just like, all right, let's get some initial opinions of how this might matter. And so what happens is, if you, again, keep playing the video, play the next part, it'll cover this. But what happens is, certain states approve the birth control pill, and this happens at different times. So, okay, why might this be good for historical research? The answer is, well, it's kind of like a treatment and control group. It gives us a natural experiment. So the pill is approved in some states, it's not approved in other states, and so we can sort of look at the effect and try to nail down the causal effect of the birth control pill. Okay. And again, thinking, keep the video going and pause again. All right, so why would the birth control pill have this effect on enrollment in various schools? Well, I can plan pregnancies now. So if I'm taking the birth control pill, I can sort of plan out my pregnancies, and that allows me to really make these long-term investments. Like if you sort of have a better idea of you see this in business as well. If you have a better idea of what the future looks like, you can make better investments or more longer term investments. So uncertainty can be a killer for investment. So this sort of gives women more certainty over the reproductive cycle, and so they can make these investments in these graduate programs. Okay. And so you can then have a discussion. All right, so why is the pill so important in the quiet revolution? And if you watch the video, basically what the video is saying is like the pill comes out, and it sort of allows women to make these adjustments to delay family, invest in education, and sort of change their employment opportunities. So for economic historians, the birth control pill is much, much more important for transforming that labor force participation rate than the story that is told in most history classes, which is World War II. For economic historians, it's much more about the pill, this new piece of technology that allows for these changes. And again, this is sort of a common theme if you go through economic history, is historians will sort of look to big events, and economic historians will look to more institutional change or technological change for explanations for what happened. Okay. Now, this research, like I said, won a Nobel Prize. And one of the reasons is because they were really able to nail causality because of that sort of laboratory where, all right, we have some states that have it and other states that don't. All right, so that's our first one, labor force participation rate. Next, we're going to move to unemployment rate. So what's something interesting about unemployment? Now, for here, we're going to go to cross-country differences. So you're going to ask your students, just to get them involved, a little bit of bell ringer, rank these countries in terms of their unemployment rates, all right, from lowest to highest. Just have them guess what they think has the lowest, what has the highest. All right, this is what they look like in 2023. Now, in general, it's going to look like this. So in general, you're going to have the US with the lowest, Spain with the highest, kind of no matter what year you look at. And generally, France and Italy will have much higher unemployment than the US. All right, and so the question is, why? All right. So we're going to play this video. So again, we have a nice produced video for this on structural unemployment. So why would there be sort of long-term persistent unemployment, which we're going to call structural unemployment? You need these like significant mismatches. These mismatches need to persist between employee and employer. So these mismatches can look like skill mismatches. Okay, well, I got this job, I just can't find workers with the right skills, or geographic ones as well. All right, so the jobs are over here, and people live over there, or there's just like barriers, stopping people from working. But if you have this long-term unemployment, it's structural, and there has to be some sort of system, so something in the system that's causing it, and you can see it. We'll go back to those unemployment rates. There's these big differences. So there's got to be some sort of policy difference that's going on. All right. So keep playing the video. We'll talk about at-will employment next. So at-will employment means that it's easy for either the employee or the employer to end the relationship. Okay, so easy to basically, if I'm the employee, it's easy for me to leave my job. If I'm the employer, it's easier for me to get rid of workers. All right. And again, keep playing the video. And now we're going to do sort of an analogy. How is employment like marriage? Okay, well, it's a sort of long-term commitment. And so, if there are various laws about, who can leave and who can be fired, it becomes much more of a serious commitment. Where, all right, I need to be sort of sure of something before I jump into it, just like a marriage. Like I want to be sure about this person before I make this commitment. So the more sort of protections you put on employment, the more it looks like a marriage where, hey, if it's going to be very, very hard to get rid of this person that I hire, I have to be much more sure about them. All right. And so on this graph, keep playing the video, pause at 448. We're just going to highlight this graph from the video just to make sure people understand it. What is being measured here on the x-axis is basically how hard it is to fire people, and then long-term unemployment on the y-axis. You can see there's sort of this direct relationship saying, look, if you make it very, very difficult to either hire and fire people, you're going to get higher unemployment, higher long-term unemployment, and that is exactly what this graph is showing. Okay, skip a bit and then play. Skip to 6:15 because that next bit's not really relevant, and then end the video at 8:47. Okay, and so what basically the punchline of the video is, why do we see these differences between countries in terms of unemployment? What the video pointing out is labor market rigidity, meaning if you make it hard to fire somebody, there's a benefit to that. All right, there's a trade-off here. The benefit is, okay, that's great for me as the worker, knowing that I have some protections, like it's going to be hard to get rid of me. All right, but the downside is if the employer then is going to be very, very careful about who they hire. All right, they're going to say, all right, well, look, if you're going to basically force me to marry whoever I hire, if you're going to force me to marry whoever I date, I'm going to be incredibly picky, or I might just not decide to go on any dates. Okay. If you had to date, if you're going to go on a first date with somebody and you got to get married, you may just say, you know what, I'm not going on any first dates. Okay. I'd rather be alone than annoyed, is one of a favorite phrase of mine. And so employers just may say, look, it's going to be too much of a hassle. Like if every person I hire, I'm going to be stuck with, like, they're going to pull back on hiring or be very reticent. And so you'll get these long-term higher unemployment rates if you make the labor market more secure. We're not saying, we're not saying, okay, one's a good way to do something or a bad way to do something. That's sort of for class discussion. Okay, which would you prefer? Would you prefer to have lower unemployment but less protection, or the other way? The point is there's a trade-off. You can't just have, low unemployment and these huge protections. As we see from the data, it's not going to work like that. All right. And so we've sort of investigated two things in this day, with two very, very well done videos, like, all right, that are related to the topic. What's going on with women's labor force participation rate in the 20th century, and what are the reasons for that? And what are the reasons for these differences in unemployment between countries? All right, so that is day 3. Again, hopefully bringing some relevance to these data that the students have calculated in day 1 and day 2. If you haven't already, be sure to request your free copy of our Labor Force and Unemployment Unit Plan, or check out one of our other videos.